Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and today we're going to be looking at Roman armour. The reason for this is a good friend of mine called Rita sent us a message via Twitter, and she's been actually looking at Roman armour in particular in relation to a book. So today's video is about that. As you're probably aware, I am a bit of a military historian, so please accept my apologies in advance. I may end up talking very enthusiastically, but more so very fast, mainly because our videos last about 15 minutes, no more than 15 minutes, so there's a lot to get in that time. What I will draw your attention to is, if you look at the Roman period in history, it's quite a large one. We concentrate on British history mainly. We do also cover ancient Egypt and ancient Greece. So whenever we talk about the Romans, we relate it to the Romans in Britain, or as they called it, the Romans in Britannia. Therefore, really, we're looking at 1st century Romans. That's the conquest era of the Roman period. However, what we must not forget is the Romans have been around for a long time. If you follow legend, Romulus and Remus founded Rome way back in ancient times in the fog of history. However, we're talking really pretty specifically 1st century. The Romans actually attempted to attack Britain. They attempted to invade Britain or Britannia around about 55 BC, so quite early on really. But the 43 AD invasion is the one that we all think about, when Claudius came along, landed on the south coast, even with war elephants, and then moved their way through the country, eventually consolidating at the top of Britain at Hadrian's Wall. So when we look at the Romans, we're concentrating on 1st century. However, I will draw your attention to some early Romans. So these are what the Romans would have looked like way back in the mists of time, really. As you can see, very basic actually, wearing a big square bronze breastplate, nothing more than a square of armour really. Later on, they started to wear more mail, and what you have to remember about mail is it goes back a very long way in history. Romans were wearing it even in the 1st century. The Romans had been wearing it for some time, possibly from their contact with the Gauls, for example. The Celts, the Britons also wore mail. So when we think of Romans, please never just think the armour that I'm going to show you is what the Romans wore. They did, but in the 1st century. You have to remember the Roman era is a big one, and therefore armour, like the clothing, changes quite dramatically. Anyway, we're going to concentrate, as I said, about the Romans in Britain around about 43 AD, the start of the big invasion which saw the conquest of this island along with the rest of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire by the 1st century was pretty big. We can say from Scotland all the way down to North Africa, from as far over as Spain to all the way across to Mesopotamia and also Syria. So it's a huge empire. So what did the Roman armour look like? That's the aim of this video. So this here is a copy of a Roman helmet, and like I said, depending on the period that we're portraying, depends on what helmet, for example, that I'm going to wear. This is the helmet that I use when we're representing 1st century Romans, the time of the 43 AD invasion. And today, historians and archaeologists often call this the Imperial Gallic helmet, and it's very iconic. It's the helmet that we often associate with Romans. It's made of iron, but there's also decoration added on in bronze, and it's a very good helmet. It's designed that anything hitting the top of it would glance off. It's a rounded helmet, very useful. Rounded helmets are better than flat-topped helmets. There are some extra design features. The ridges that are actually hammered into it are very good, because the ridges give strength to what would be flat plates of iron. We've also got a brow ridge. This is designed to stop swords from sliding down and cutting into the face, so it would actually halt there. There are some earpieces here. which is designed to protect the ears inside the helmet. You need to be able to hear what the officers are saying. So good gaps where the ears are important, but we have these guards on the top to protect that. We also have these huge cheek pieces that when the helmet is done up correctly, there is only a very small window, a very small V on the outside world. Very little will hopefully get into that bit where your eyes and nose and the top of your mouth is really. There is also a fantastic neck guard on these helmets, also ridged, and that is to give much more strength to the flat plates than it would have. And the neck guard is obviously very long because it protects for any sword cuts from above or from behind. It's absolutely fantastic. It's actually one of the most comfortable helmets that I wear, and is made of iron, so you do have to keep it constantly cleaned and oiled. So that is what we would always say is the Imperial Gallic helmet. There's lots of different types of helmets, and it was usually down to Roman soldiers to acquire their own. Now, the armour we're looking at specifically is that of a legionary. If you look at the Romans, there was generally two types of soldier. The legionary was the citizen soldier. In the early days, back in history, they had to actually be from Rome itself, but you have to be a Roman to be a legionary, especially by the 1st century as well. But then there was also the auxiliaries, and they dressed completely different. Auxiliaries, by the way, are the what you could say in comical terms the arrow fodder really. They're the slingers, the archers and so on. But what we're concentrating on, like I said, is a 1st century Roman legionary. So that's the helmet for those. Body armour, they are wearing quite iconic armour, but not everyone, because like I said, there was a lot of mail being worn also. But down here, and I will lift it up, it weighs a ton, is my Lorica. That's the Latin word for armour, just like the helmet is a Cassius. So this is my Lorica, and this is actually a specific type of armour known as Lorica segmentata, because it's actually made in individual segments. I always say to school children when we let them try it on, it's like a Terry's chocolate orange, individual segments. And that's what this is, Lorica segmentata, segmented armour. And as you can see, it's very, very well made. Each plate overlaps the one below it. Inside there is a whole series of leather and rivets holding this completely together. Now we have lots and lots of drawings and illustrations that we can use from the Roman period to say that they definitely wore this. One of the best sources, I always say, is, for example, Trajan's column. If you ever look at pictures on Trajan's column, Google it, you will see this armour being worn. Also, mail armour being worn, Lorica hamata. So you do have to look out. Not every Roman soldier had this, but this was common in 1st century Britannia. But as well as this being very, very protective, it is very heavy. Whereas mail armour, it's a little bit more comfortable to wear. The biggest problem with this, as I found by wearing it, if you're doing any work that's quite exhaustive, it does actually restrict your breathing to a certain degree, even if it's laced up loosely. But the best thing about this is it does move really well. And as Romans are having to be to dig forts and in ramparts and in embankments all the time, this is actually comfortable to a certain degree to wear whilst doing that work, because it does actually move. The plates do move over the top of each other. As well as looking at old drawings and illustrations of this armour, or carvings like Trajan's column, you can actually find this armour and mail armour to a certain degree being found archaeologically as well. This armour, the way mine is put together, is actually based on what's called the Newstead Lorica, and this is from a find up in Scotland. And if you ever want to go and see it, or just Google it at home, you can find that at actually the Museum of Scotland, I think it's called, in Edinburgh. But if you go there, you will see fragments of this armour in there. There's also another set known as the Corbridge set, which is now looked after by English Heritage at their site in Corbridge on Hadrian's Wall. And like I said, it's actually Lorica segmentata. It's fragments of this armour from the 1st century. The Corbridge one was actually found in a box, I believe. It was placed in a box and buried at Corbridge, and that's how archaeologists found it quite some time ago now. So if you're a Roman legionary, you're a citizen soldier as such, you've just invaded Britannia in 43 AD, you would have your Cassius, the Imperial Gallic as we would call it now, helmet, and you would wear your Lorica segmentata, very iconic. But like I said, not everyone wore it. There was still a lot of mail being worn by the Romans in the 1st century. And then the final piece of protection, the final defensive thing that was carried by a Roman legionary was in fact the shield. Now, we've given Latin names to everything else. For example, Cassius, Lorica or Lorica segmentata. This is the shield, which had a Latin name also, and that was a scutum. And it's a big, iconic, oblong shield, flat at the top, bottoms and sides, and it has bronze work around the edge to protect the edges of the wood. Now, this is the closest you'll get to the type of wood known as plywood, because what these were made from was layers of wood glued together and then covered in linen, like this one is. Like I said, the edging protects the edges from sword cuts and so on. In the centre of the shield, you do actually have the boss, and the boss is actually not just there to protect the hand that's behind it, it's also there to use as a weapon. So you may end up, if you're an enemy soldier, having this come towards your face, which is not a good way to start a battle. So if you're a Roman, 43 AD, you've just invaded Britannia, you will have your scutum, your Lorica, Lorica segmentata, and your Cassius. But like I said, you may have a bronze helmet, you may have mail, but if you're a legionary, you would definitely have these oblong shields. Now, if you want another video, maybe on the auxiliaries or what the auxiliary armour looked like, or even the Roman Navy, please get in touch. So hopefully, Rita, this has answered some of your questions about Roman armour. And like I said, the Roman period in Britain specifically spans from 43 AD right up to the 5th century, maybe about 410 AD if you believe the story. Anyway, stay safe, stay in, and see you soon. Bye bye.